Christmas Eve was supposed to be a day of love, warmth, and family. For most people, it was a day of laughter, of wrapping presents by the fire, of the scent of cinnamon and pine filling the air. But for me, Elias Thorne, 60 years old, it was the day my entire life turned upside down. The day my own son threw me out of my house, the only home I had known for decades, like I was nothing more than trash on the street. I should start from the beginning, from the life I had before this betrayal. For 35 years, I had built a life from the ground up. My chain of plant nurseries in Atlanta, Georgia, 5 in total, each one a testament to my knowledge, hard work, and love for growing things, was valued at roughly $20 million. But numbers and valuations never capture the real wealth I had, the love I shared with my wife, Marissa, who passed away 4 years ago, leaving a void I could never fill, and my only son, Darius, who I thought I could trust. Marissa was the heart of my life. She fought lung cancer bravely, even though she never smoked a day in her life. I spent every second by her side, investing every penny, every hope, into her fight for life. When she finally succumbed, her last words to me were clear. Take care of Darius, but don't spoil him. Teach him to be strong, to stand on his own. I failed her. I gave him everything he ever asked for, and in the process, I lost myself, my home, and eventually my dignity. After Marissa's death, grief consumed me. I poured all my love and attention into Darius. When he said, "So you're not alone, Dad," I clung to those words, thinking he was the only family I had left. I didn't see the growing greed in him, the subtle manipulations, the way he used my love as leverage. He asked for a new car, $15,000, a business investment, $1 million, which failed in less than a year, a house for him and his wife, Geneva, $500,000. Every request I fulfilled without question. Every loan, every gift, every sacrifice I made became just another tool in their hands. 6 months ago, he came to me with a proposal that I should have refused immediately. "Dad, Geneva's pregnant. We need more space. We should all live together in your house." The idea of family together again, of seeing my grandson every day, was tempting. But something in my gut whispered caution. "Let me think about it," I said. But Darius didn't wait. 2 weeks later, they arrived with all their belongings, claiming it was temporary. Temporary became permanent. They took the best rooms, redecorated, modernized, erased every memory of Marissa. My heart ached as I watched her presence vanish, replaced by Darius and Geneva's cold, selfish taste. When I pleaded to leave her room as it was, Darius scoffed. "Dad, that's the master suite. We need it more than you do. Mom isn't here anymore. It's just a room." I was pushed into the staff quarters, a small, lonely room at the back of the house. I accepted it, fearful of being left completely alone. But life became worse. They denied me access to my grandson, Silas. Every request, every attempt to connect with him was met with excuses, with emotional blackmail. "Dad, you can't see Silas unless you help with the expenses. You might drop him." 3 months before Christmas, Darius handed me a stack of papers. "Sign these," he said. "It's for your own protection, Dad. Sometimes you forget things. You need to make sure everything is in order." Lies. Oh, lies. I didn't sign. Something inside me, a voice like Marissa's, whispered, "Don't do it, Elias. Don't trust him." And from that day, they became cold, distant, cruel. Geneva wouldn't speak to me, and Darius used my love and fear of losing Silas as chains to control me. Christmas Eve arrived. I tried to bring the spirit of the holiday into the house. I made pancakes, bacon, cinnamon rolls, the traditions Marissa and I had cherished. I wanted to see my grandson, to share a moment of joy. But Geneva stopped me at the kitchen door, her eyes filled with contempt. "What are you doing here? You're not welcome today." Darius joined in, scowling. "Dad doesn't understand. He's not included." My heart broke, shattered into pieces I didn't know could be broken again. I had given everything, loved endlessly. And for what? For my own son to push me away on Christmas Eve, the day I had always cherished above all others. I gathered my few belongings, walking out of the house I had built, the house Marissa and I had filled with love and memories, and into the cold, bitter night. I had nowhere to go. My savings, my home, my dignity, they meant nothing to the people I had loved most. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in decades. And yet, as I walked through the silent streets of Atlanta that night, I realized one thing: I couldn't stay in despair. I had to find a new purpose, a place where I was valued, where my skills, my knowledge, and my heart mattered. That decision would lead me to the mansion of a reclusive billionaire, where my life and the course of everything I had believed about love, family, and trust would begin to change forever. The betrayal of Christmas Eve was only the beginning. When I walked out of my house that Christmas Eve, the bitter December wind bit at my face like a physical reminder of the betrayal I had endured. Atlanta's streets were alive with the soft glow of holiday lights, cheerful carolers, and families bustling through shopping malls. Everywhere I looked, I saw people celebrating with the ones they loved, and the contrast to my own life was unbearable. My home, once a sanctuary of memories with Marissa, had been claimed by my own son and daughter-in-law. My grandson, Silas, the child I had dreamed of holding in my arms, had become a bargaining chip, a tool of manipulation I was powerless to resist. I wandered through the city that night, my coat barely keeping me warm, clutching a small bag with the few things I had taken from the house. I thought about the choices I had made, the way I had spoiled Darius after Marissa's death, the way I had thought that giving him everything would keep him close. But it hadn't. It had only trained him to see me as a resource, a bank account, a servant to his whims. I found a small bench in a quiet park and sat down, staring blankly at the twinkling lights of the city skyline. I felt like I was sinking into a void. Was this what my life had come to? At 60, wealthy but alone, betrayed by the only family I had left? My businesses, my home, all of it now seemed meaningless. For the first time in decades, I wondered if I had wasted my life giving and giving, only to end up abandoned on the streets. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a spark refused to die. I could feel it, a small, stubborn flame of determination that whispered, "You are Elias Thorne. You have built empires, nurtured life from soil and seed, survived grief, loss, and betrayal. You are not finished yet." I didn't know where I would go, how I would survive the coming days, but I knew I couldn't return to that house. Not as a guest, not as a supplicant, not as a man forced to beg for the right to see his grandson. I needed a plan, a purpose, and most of all, a way to reclaim my dignity. The next morning, I began searching for work. I needed employment not because I was poor, but because I needed to regain control over my life. My businesses were still mine, technically. But Darius had shown me how easily someone could manipulate, mismanage, and steal from me. I wanted a fresh start, away from Atlanta, away from the ghosts of Marissa, Darius, and the house that had become a prison. It wasn't long before I came across an unusual opportunity. A billionaire, reclusive, eccentric, and wealthy beyond imagination, was seeking someone to care for her estate. Not her wealth, not her staff, not her finances, but her garden. The estate was massive, sprawling over acres with rare plants, exotic flowers, and sections that had been left untended for years. Her son, I learned, was deaf and rarely interacted with anyone. The task seemed simple enough, and yet something about it intrigued me. A garden was life, growth, nurturing, something I had spent my entire life mastering. Perhaps in tending someone else's garden, I could also begin to tend my own wounded soul. When I arrived at the estate, I was struck by its grandeur: marble fountains, sculpted hedges, and a greenhouse filled with orchids that glowed under the sunlight made it clear that no expense had been spared. The billionaire herself, a woman named Clarissa Vanderbilt, was imposing yet graceful. She explained my duties succinctly: care for the plants, maintain the grounds, and most importantly, watch over her son, Adrian, who often spent time in the gardens. She had grown worried that he was isolated, that no one had ever tried to communicate with him, and she hoped my presence might change that. I had never worked for anyone in my life. My nurseries, my plants, my business. I had always been the master of my own domain, but something about this job felt different. It was not about control, not about wealth, not about power. It was about connection, about care, and perhaps about redemption. From the first day, I noticed Adrian. He was sitting near a fountain, headphones in, isolated in his own world. No one spoke to him, no one tried. He looked at me warily, as though he had learned not to expect kindness from adults. I felt a pang in my heart, reminders of Darius, Geneva, and Silas. I approached slowly, kneeling beside him. Using basic signs I remembered from a short class I had taken years ago, I introduced myself. "Hello, my name is Elias. I will help take care of this garden. What is your name?" Adrian's eyes widened slightly. A flicker of curiosity passed across his face. Slowly, he signed back, "Adrian." Something miraculous happened then. For the first time in decades, I felt seen. Here was a person who had never known attention, care, or conversation, and I could offer him both. I could teach, communicate, and most importantly, I could nurture someone who needed me. Over the next few days, our interactions grew. I taught him about plants, about soil, about the way sunlight affects growth, and he taught me patience, observation, and the quiet joy of presence. It was on the third day that Clarissa approached me as I helped Adrian plant a small row of tulips. She had been watching from the veranda, unseen, and her expression was unreadable. "He's never interacted with anyone like this," she said quietly. Her voice carried a weight I couldn't place. Then she uttered 5 words that would haunt me. "Where have you been all my life?" I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I realized that despite the betrayal, despite the pain, despite the loneliness and humiliation I had endured, there was still a place for me in the world. A place where my skills, my patience, and my love could matter. And for the first time in weeks, I felt hope. The betrayal of my own son, the house I had lost, the grandson I had been denied. All of it was still painful. But in the gardens of the Vanderbilt estate, with Adrian's silent companionship, I began to feel alive again. Perhaps this was what I had been missing all along. Not wealth, not power, not family by blood, but the quiet knowledge that I could still make a difference, that I could still be needed, and that I still had something to give. That night, as I walked back to the modest quarters provided for me, I thought about Christmas Eve, about Darius, Geneva, and the life I had lost. The bitterness was still there, thick and suffocating, but it was now tempered by determination. I had been stripped of my home, my family, and my sense of safety, but I had not been stripped of my knowledge, my skills, or my heart. And that, I realized, was worth more than anything Darius and Geneva had taken from me. As I lay down to sleep, I whispered to the darkness, "I will not let them define the rest of my life. I am Elias Thorne. I am not done yet." The road ahead would be long and uncertain. I did not know how I would reclaim my life or if I would ever see my grandson again. But I knew one thing for certain. I had found a place where I belonged, where I could grow, nurture, and finally start to heal. And little did I know, the simple act of conversing with a silent boy in the garden would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything, forever. Days turned into weeks, and I settled into a rhythm at the Vanderbilt estate. The gardens, once wild and neglected, began to bloom under my care. Tulips, roses, and exotic orchids flourished. The fountains sparkled, pathways were cleared, and the scent of freshly turned soil and fragrant flowers filled the air. But more importantly than the garden itself, I began forming a bond with Adrian, the young boy who had lived in silence for far too long. At first, our interactions were cautious. He would sit under the shade of a maple tree, headphones on, staring at the water, occasionally glancing at me with wary eyes. I knew that trust couldn't be demanded. It had to be earned. I began with small gestures, watering plants together, pointing out tiny buds about to bloom, showing him how to prune roses without hurting them. "Do you like this?" I signed one afternoon, indicating the tulips we had just planted. He hesitated, then signed back, "Yes, very pretty." A simple exchange, but it sent a thrill through me. I had never been able to feel such satisfaction from wealth, from business, success, or even from the gifts I had lavished on Darius. Here was a pure connection, built on patience, kindness, and attention. I realized for the first time in years that I mattered to someone, not as a provider, not as a bank, but as a human being. Over time, Adrian began showing me his own world. He pointed out birds nesting in the hedges, insects crawling over leaves, and the shapes clouds formed above the garden. We created a silent language of our own, subtle gestures, shared glances, laughter at small discoveries. I taught him to sign not just words, but feelings, joy, surprise, wonder, even frustration when a plant wilted or a flower was broken. One day, while showing him how to plant bulbs for the upcoming spring, I noticed how focused he was, how absorbed in learning something new. "You have a good touch," I signed. "Like your mother taught you?" He shook his head. "No, mother." His words, signed in such quiet finality, pierced me. I thought of Marissa, of Darius, of Silas, and of the hollow ache in my chest from all I had lost. Yet at the same time, I felt a surge of determination. Adrian might not have had the warmth of family around him, but I could provide what he had been denied. I could give him prime attention and recognition, the things he had been starved of. And then Clarissa appeared. I had barely noticed her at first. She had a quiet presence, observing without intruding, her tall frame blending with the marble of the veranda. That afternoon, she watched as I demonstrated to Adrian how to dig a trench for irrigation. The way I gently corrected his hand position, the patience in my expression, the encouragement in my gestures, all of it had drawn her attention. She stepped closer and whispered, almost to herself, "Where have you been all my life?" The words hit me like a thunderclap. My heart leapt, then sank with disbelief. What did she mean? Was it admiration, surprise, gratitude, or something deeper? I looked up, startled, and she smiled faintly, almost shyly. I realized then that my years of expertise, my knowledge of plants, and my ability to nurture were finally being recognized. And not just for the garden, but for Adrian, the boy who had been neglected, silenced, and ignored by everyone else. Over the next few weeks, my bond with Adrian deepened. He began coming to me voluntarily, leaving his headphones behind, asking for guidance on tasks in the garden. He started learning about fertilization, the importance of sunlight, and the care of rare plants. Each day, I watched his confidence grow, his curiosity blossom, and I felt a sense of pride I had not felt since Marissa was alive. And with that connection came clarity. The years of betrayal, the humiliation at the hands of Darius and Geneva, and the pain of being cast aside began to lose their power over me. Here, in this vast estate, in the quiet companionship of a boy who had never known true attention, I felt strength returning. One morning, as we pruned roses together, Adrian signed a question that caught me off guard. "Will you stay?" I paused, looking at him, feeling the weight of the question. Stay? Not in this house forever, perhaps, but stay present, stay connected, stay alive. I signed back, "Yes, I will stay." That simple affirmation was a turning point. It wasn't about me reclaiming my wealth, my home, or even my dignity. It was about reclaiming my life. For the first time in months, I felt purpose. I was needed. And in that need, I found a quiet power. Clarissa, always observing, began to trust me more openly. She would ask for updates on Adrian's progress, and I noticed her smile more often, a subtle light in her eyes. One day, as we walked the garden path together, she said, "You've done more for him in days than anyone has in his entire life. I can't thank you enough." Her gratitude, the sincerity in her voice, was almost overwhelming. And yet it was also a reminder, a stark contrast to Darius and Geneva, who had used me, manipulated me, and abandoned me without a second thought. Here, for the first time, my value was recognized not because of money or control, but because of who I was, what I could give, and how I could nurture. The garden became my sanctuary. Adrian became my companion. And Clarissa, a subtle ally and observer, reminded me that I still had worth beyond my past failures. Slowly, I began to heal. My grief for Marissa was still present, but it was tempered by purpose and connection. My rage at Darius and Geneva simmered beneath the surface, a quiet fire that fueled my determination to reclaim my life in some form. Yet even as I nurtured Adrian and tended the estate, I couldn't forget the events of that fateful Christmas Eve. I couldn't forget the cold rejection, the manipulation, and the loss of my home and family. The memories haunted me like shadows in the corners of my mind. But now I had a choice. I could continue to wallow in pain, or I could channel it into action, into growth, into life. One afternoon, while watering the rows of orchids in the greenhouse, I noticed Adrian studying me closely. He signed slowly, deliberately. "You are different." I nodded. "Yes, I am different. And I have learned things. Things I wish I had known before." He tilted his head, curious. I realized I could teach him more than just plants. I could teach him about resilience, about strength, about the quiet courage it takes to survive betrayal and heartbreak. And in teaching him, I was teaching myself. That night, as I lay in my small quarters on the estate, I thought about what Clarissa had said, about her words that echoed in my mind. "Where have you been all my life?" For the first time in years, I felt seen, truly seen, not as a father, not as a businessman, not as a provider, but as a man with skills, heart, and purpose. And I knew deep in my soul that this silent connection with Adrian was only the beginning. A door had opened, a path revealed, and though the road ahead was uncertain, I was ready to walk it. Because for the first time since Marissa's death, since Darius's betrayal, since being cast aside, I felt alive again. The garden had given me more than beauty. It had given me hope, and hope was stronger than anything I had lost. Days turned into weeks, and I found a rhythm in the Vanderbilt estate that I had not known for years. The gardens thrived under my care. The flowers blossomed with renewed vibrancy, and Adrian's confidence grew with each passing day. But the real transformation was happening within me. Slowly, carefully, I was reclaiming pieces of myself that had been buried under grief, betrayal, and years of being used by my own son. At first, it was small things. I woke earlier in the morning, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. I chose the flowers to plant, the shrubs to prune, the sections of the garden to design. I realized that I had been controlling everything in my life for so long, my businesses, my household, my own family, that I had forgotten what it was like to simply act for myself, to make choices without fear of being judged, rejected, or manipulated. Adrian became my companion and my teacher in ways I hadn't anticipated. He observed closely, questioning with sharp eyes, and through his silent perspective, I learned patience and humility. I could feel my mind sharpening again. My thoughts became clearer, my confidence returned, and with every task completed, I felt a sense of purpose and accomplishment that Darius had taken from me. Clarissa noticed the change, though she never said it outright. She gave me more responsibility in the garden, asking for advice on landscaping, plant care, and even the overall design of the estate. She began sharing small secrets about Adrian's upbringing, the difficulties he faced, and how isolated he had been. No one had ever tried to communicate with him before me. I realized the weight of that trust, how she was giving me a piece of her life, and I couldn't betray it. One afternoon, Clarissa invited me to her study. The room smelled faintly of sandalwood and old books, the sunlight filtering through tall windows. She handed me a folder with documents regarding Adrian, the estate, and her financial arrangements. "I've been watching you," she said softly, "and I want you to know that I trust you. You understand him, you listen, you care. Not many people have the patience or the heart to do that." Her words struck me deeply. It was validation in its purest form, and it ignited a determination I hadn't felt in years. I realized that I could not only care for Adrian, but also protect him. And if I could protect him, then perhaps I could finally start to protect myself as well, from Darius, Geneva, and the life they had tried to steal from me. Over the next few weeks, I began thinking strategically. I researched legal protections, estate planning, and ways to safeguard my assets. I realized that Darius had not only betrayed me emotionally, he had also tried to manipulate my finances, using my love for him as a weapon. I needed to ensure that he could never take advantage of me again. It wasn't vengeance I sought, not yet, but security. And with each document I reviewed, each step I took to understand the legal landscape, I felt a surge of empowerment. Meanwhile, my bond with Adrian grew deeper. He began initiating our conversations in sign language, asking questions, making suggestions, and even correcting me when I made mistakes in the garden. One day he signed something that made my heart swell. You make me happy." I paused, unsure of how to respond. Finally, I signed back, "And you make me alive again." That moment crystallized everything. Adrian wasn't just a boy I was helping. He was a mirror reflecting the part of me that had been lost. Through nurturing him, I was nurturing myself. And through our silent connection, I realized that life could still offer joy, purpose, and meaning. We felt missing, even after betrayal, grief, and heartbreak. Clarissa continued to observe quietly. One evening, as we were planting evening primroses near the fountain, she spoke directly. "Elias, I think you found your calling again. Not just the garden, but in him. You have given him something no one else could. And I've seen the way you've reclaimed yourself. It's remarkable." Her words were humbling, but they also reminded me of the contrast between this life and the one I had left behind. Darius and Geneva had taken everything from me, the house, my grandson, even my dignity. But here I had purpose, respect, and genuine connection. I realized that strength was not in submission, nor in wealth, nor in controlling others. It was in understanding one's own value and refusing to be diminished by those who sought to exploit it. As the days passed, I began to plan for the future. I could not undo the past, nor could I control Darius and Geneva's actions, but I could ensure that I was never vulnerable to their manipulation again. I began contacting lawyers discreetly, reviewing my estate, and considering ways to protect my grandson Silas, even if it meant confronting my son legally. Yet I didn't let bitterness consume me entirely. I focused on growth, both in the garden and in myself. Each morning, I walked the paths we had cleared together, noticing new shoots, vibrant colors, and the promise of life in every corner. I marveled at Adrian's joy, his laughter, his silent but expressive curiosity. In a way, he had become the son I never truly had, the companion I had longed for after Marissa's death. One particular morning, as snow lightly dusted the hedges, Adrian signed a question that gave me pause. "Do you miss him?" I understood immediately. He meant Darius. The pain of that question cut through me, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to acknowledge the hurt fully. I nodded slightly. "Yes," I signed, "but I am stronger now." He smiled faintly, as if he understood, and turned back to the tulips we were planting. That moment, small yet profound, reminded me that I could feel grief and empowerment simultaneously. I could remember betrayal without letting it define me. I could honor my past without sacrificing my future. Clarissa's trust deepened as well. She began leaving me in charge of certain decisions around Adrian's care and the maintenance of the estate. I realized that my abilities, my expertise in plants, my patience, and my understanding of human nature were being recognized and respected in a way they hadn't been for decades. This recognition fueled a quiet confidence within me. I began envisioning the life I wanted, one where I was not a victim, where I could protect myself and those I cared about, and where my knowledge and heart mattered. I thought of Darius and Geneva and the cold satisfaction of knowing that I would no longer be subject to their manipulation. The fire of revenge began to flicker subtly, not in anger, but in the careful, deliberate planning that comes from someone who has been wronged and has learned patience and strategy. By the time Christmas approached again, I was not the man who had been humiliated and thrown out of his own home. I was sharper, more focused, and stronger, physically, emotionally, and mentally. The pain of betrayal remained, but it no longer controlled me. I had found a new family in Adrian and a new purpose in the gardens I nurtured. And yet, in the quiet moments when I stood among the roses and tulips, I allowed myself a thought that both terrified and exhilarated me. I would see Darius and Geneva again, not as a helpless father, but as a man who had reclaimed his strength, who had built a sanctuary, and who was ready to confront the past with clarity, wisdom, and precision. Because the road to redemption, and perhaps subtle revenge, was only beginning. I had been stripped of my home, my family, and my sense of control, but I had not been stripped of my heart, my mind, or my will. And now, with Adrian by my side and the estate as my fortress, I was ready to rebuild. The silent connection I had formed in the garden was no longer just about survival. It was about empowerment and the promise of reclaiming everything that had been stolen from me. By the time the first signs of spring appeared, I had transformed in ways I hadn't thought possible. The garden flourished under my care. Rows of tulips, roses, hydrangeas, and rare orchids created a living tapestry that drew admiration even from the billionaire family I now worked for. But more important than the beauty of the garden was the transformation within me. I was no longer the man who had been cast aside by his own son on Christmas Eve. I was stronger, wiser, and aware of the power I still held. Adrian and I had formed a bond that went far beyond the garden. He had grown confident, expressive, and curious, signing sentences in full fluidity that conveyed not only words but emotion. Watching him thrive gave me a sense of purpose I had long thought lost. The realization that I could influence someone's life in such a meaningful way reignited a fire in me, a drive to reclaim not just my dignity, but also my life, which Darius and Geneva had tried to destroy. It was then that I decided it was time to act. I didn't rush into revenge blindly. I had learned patience, observation, and strategy, tools that Darius and Geneva lacked. They had thrived on my love, my fear of losing them, and my desire to see my grandson. I would use the lessons I had learned and my regained clarity to ensure that I could never be manipulated by them again. I began discreetly reviewing my legal options. My estate, my assets, and my businesses were still mine, though Darius had tried to take control through lies, deception, and coercion. I reached out to lawyers I trusted, explaining the history of emotional manipulation and financial exploitation. They advised me to take steps to secure my finances and ensure that my grandson Silas was protected. By then, I understood that protecting Silas was not only a moral imperative, but also the final link to my son that Darius could no longer exploit. Meanwhile, Adrian continued to thrive, and Clarissa's trust in me deepened. She began asking me for advice not only on the garden, but on Adrian's overall care, including his education and social development. I realized that I had become a central figure in this household, a place where I was valued for my intelligence, patience, and character, not for what I could give in terms of money or resources. The contrast to my treatment at the hands of Darius and Geneva could not have been starker. One morning, while planting new bulbs near the rose bushes, Clarissa handed me an envelope with documents inside. I've drafted these to formalize Adrian's guardianship in the management of this estate, she said quietly. I trust you entirely, Elias. I want you to have the authority to make decisions, protect him, and ensure his future. I felt a surge of pride and purpose. Here was a responsibility I could fulfill without fear, without coercion, and without manipulation. It was a chance to right wrongs indirectly, to protect someone vulnerable, and in doing so reclaim my sense of justice. The plan took time, careful steps that required patience and observation. I didn't need to confront Darius and Geneva aggressively. I simply needed to secure my position legally and emotionally. I ensured that my accounts were fully protected, that my assets were out of their reach, and that Silas's welfare would be legally safeguarded. Every move was deliberate, strategic, and silent, just as I had learned from my time observing Adrian's quiet resilience. And then came the day of reckoning. Darius, believing me still weak and compliant, tried to manipulate me once again with threats and lies. He demanded access to certain accounts, claiming family rights. He attempted the same emotional leverage he had used for years, the promise of seeing Silas, the insinuation that I would be a failure if I didn't comply. I listened calmly, signing a simple statement to Adrian, watch and learn. Then I calmly informed Darius that all access he sought was legally blocked and that Silas's welfare had been secured. He sputtered, anger flashing in his eyes, but there was nothing he could do. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of power over him. Not from intimidation, not from wealth, but from clarity, preparation, and control. Geneva, seeing that Darius's usual tactics had failed, tried to confront me as well. But I was calm, composed, and unyielding. The fear they had instilled in me for so long was gone. I could see clearly now how much they had underestimated me, how much they had relied on my love and fear against me. And now I was free. But the most profound victory was not legal or financial. It was emotional. For the first time since Marissa's death, I was at peace. I could remember my wife, my life before betrayal, without being consumed by grief. I could think of Darius and Geneva without rage, knowing they no longer had power over me. And I could hold Silas freely, without fear, without manipulation, and with love that was not conditional. Adrian, ever observant, signed a small, almost shy sentence one evening as I tucked him in. "You are brave." I smiled, tears welling in my eyes. "And you've made me strong." Clarissa, witnessing our bond, finally spoke words that resonated deeply. "You have given him more than he ever had, and in doing so you found yourself again. You're not just a gardener, Elias. You're a protector, a teacher, and a man who refuses to be defeated." I realized she was right. The journey from betrayal and despair to empowerment had been long, painful, and filled with doubt, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and in possession of something that Darius and Geneva could never take away: my dignity, my autonomy, and the knowledge that love and care, when given freely, are never wasted. Months passed, and I continued to thrive in my role. The estate became my sanctuary, Adrian my companion, and Clarissa my ally. My businesses remained secure, my legal protections in place, and my heart open once more, not to manipulation, but to genuine connection and purpose. One day as I walked through the flowering tulips, Adrian ran to me with a bundle of new sprouts. "Plant them," he signed eagerly, and I did. Together we planted them in neat rows, side by side, hands dirty, hearts full, and the sun warming our backs. It was in that simple act, nurturing life, protecting those who needed me, and reclaiming my own strength, that I found the ultimate revenge. Not in anger or punishment, but in living fully, freely, and purposefully. I had survived betrayal, regained my dignity, and discovered that even in the darkest winters, life could bloom again. And as I looked at Adrian, laughing quietly under the shade of the old oak tree, I whispered to myself, "I am Elias Thorne. I am alive, and no one will ever take that from me again." The chapter of betrayal was closed. A new chapter of empowerment, connection, and fulfillment had begun. And this time I held the pen.